This set of notes is going to talk about the differences between those developed and developing countries, what kind of things that you can see as a result of economic stability in those countries, and what kinds of things we are doing or might be doing, could be doing to combat those situations. So, we've already talked a little bit in a previous set of notes about how we separate countries out between developed and developing, and a lot of that's based on economics and trade and that sort of thing. But know that those key markers are also going to impact the results everywhere around the globe. So I just want to pull to this to this slide, so we can look at some maps and talk about some different regions of the world. So you can see that in this map here, and let me switch over. Give me just a second. Sorry, I wanted to shift my toolbar a little bit. You can see on this map here of the world that the dark blue countries are the advanced developed countries, and the red are the least developed, the underdeveloped nations of the world, and everything else is sort of in between. And you can also see that in these, I love these maps. They are amazing for taking the world and distorting it. So they're distorted based on, this one is distorted based on gross domestic product, which is an marker we use for the size of your economy. So the countries get bigger or smaller based on that particular number. So it doesn't have anything to do with population. It's 100% on whatever, for this map, for the gross domestic product. So the biggest countries you can see are the United States, and you see how like Spain and France and Germany and England, they're larger than their normal geographic size, right? India's pretty good. This is China. This blob here, you can see that, is Japan, right? This would be Egypt there in the corner of Africa, and South Africa as two large countries there. When you're looking at that, you can see that that corresponds directly with these darker blue, or the India and China, the countries that we trade a lot with. As opposed to this particular map, this is economic conditions. This is people who live on less than $1.90 a day. So $1.90 a day is going to compute out to be, I did the math wrong, hold on. 1.9 times 365 is less than $700 a year. And so you can see that this is India, right? And these African countries, that's where the countries are the poorest, which I think would make a lot of sense. But know that it's not just economics that's an issue. It also impacts social structures. So this one particularly highlights adult illiteracy, the number of adults who are unable to read and write. And again, it's very similar. So you can see, I didn't bring it to the front, sorry. You can see that countries where people don't make very much money are also then living in a world where adults don't learn how to read. Because if your family is only making less than $2 a day, you don't have time to send people to school and teach them how to read. They need to be working. They need to be making money for the family. So that's going to perpetuate this poverty cycle. Another really sad one, this one is deaths for those under the age of 5, right? And guys, the numbers are exactly the same. We're talking about people who pass away between birth and entering what we would consider entering kindergarten. It's the exact same places. So they don't have enough money. They're not learning to read, but they don't have access to medical care. Their children are dying. Like it's all in this same region. If you go back to the original map, it's in this red region, and in India, it's this structured section of the world where those countries are larger. And the bottom two, I'm not going to blow those up, but it talks about the population rate of growth. Where people lived in 1500 versus where people live today. And you can see that a lot of it is the same, right? India is still large, China is still large, Africa is still large, but there is a population increase in the United States and parts of South America. You can see that on the 1500 map, you can see Mexico because the Aztec nation was massive. There were millions of people living in the Aztec Empire in 1500. And then, of course, that shifted after the Spanish conquered. So I just think that's interesting to see that the population, other than Europe, is shrinking. There's not a whole lot of change rate there. So economic development and rapid population growth are things that are impacting the environment. They're impacting society pretty heavily. If you look at that population of the Earth chart there on the right, we didn't reach 1 billion people until 1804. And 200 years later, in 1999, not even quite 200 years later, we reached 6 billion. I remember when that marker hit, because I was in 1999, I would have been in 8th grade, and talking about that big rise in number, and it's an exponential curve, right? That's steadily increasing. But I want you to remember that this big jump here, I lost my mouse. Here, this big jump here between 1 billion and 2 billion, that jump is going to be a vaster rise. Remember, because we talked about the Industrial Revolution and the advent of healthcare, right? So that's what starts that rise. And then it grows as an exponential number. Then what we have is to consider that as we have those people moving up, we're dealing with a rise in pollution. As those developing countries, as these countries here in this map that are on orange and on red, are continuing to grow their economies without putting in environmental protection measures, you've got a lot of pollution, you've got a lot of loss of habitat. Think about what you know about what's happened to, like, for instance, the rainforest, what's happening to the polar ice caps. All of that is impacted by the growth of people. The more people that we have, the more strain we have on our environment. Global climate change is also on there. This chart that we have on the bottom shows that global temperatures are rising. That's a fact. The temperatures are rising. Look how fast the rate is. See, the line is moving up sharper now than it was here in the 18 and early 1900s, right? That's the concern. That's the jump. If you look at the red line, that's the 5-year average temperature. So it rounds the numbers out a little bit. And the other thing is this picture that I have of the people on the bicycles, that's a picture of Beijing where they deal with a lot of smog, which is obviously causing problems for people, trying to breathe. In poor countries, we have to consider things like people not having enough money, people not having enough health care, people being unable to read, they don't have access to food and that sort of thing. Just to point out some things, this map that we have in the red and yellowish green countries, right? These two bottom colors, the people living in those countries, less than half of them know how to read. In a red country, that number is less than 35%. 1/3 of the population can read. 2/3 of the population cannot read in some of those red countries. As opposed to in the United States, where we consider everyone learning how to read, unless they have a intellectual disability. Everyone learns how to read, at least at a basic level. And then this other map, with the World Hunger Map, talks about how the stat I would like to highlight here is 1 child dies every 5 seconds from a hunger-related cause. That's 5 seconds, guys. A child dies every 5 seconds. More people die from hunger than have ever died in war and that sort of thing. Those are some stellar stats. So one of the things that countries try to consider solving is the hunger problem, the world hunger problem, banding together to get food on the table for people. The If a World Were a Village of 100 People slide, I think, is also fairly powerful, where it talks about 30% of people are jobless. 1/3 of the population of the world are people who do not have jobs. But even more staggering, 40% of the world's population doesn't have a pair of shoes. I'm currently sitting in my bedroom where I have a closet with shoes in it. I'm looking at a pair of boots that didn't even fit in the closet. My kids have shoes. Annabelle has shoes, and this is 2020. Annabelle's 10 months old, and she has more than one pair of shoes. So think about those are the kind of problems that we're looking to solve in the world. And this is sort of just standardized content here, but the countries that are doing better, like if you go back and you look at this original map of the blue countries and really the dark blue countries in particular, those are countries where there are standard, accepted, functional capitalist economies with democracies that are running well and undisputed, peaceful transitions of power and that sort of thing. As those rights and responsibilities come to people, the situation does get better. And South Korea is a great example of how that went down, where they had a lot of issues in the 1960s. They were having a civil war and a communist revolution, and South Korea has been able to rise out of that and come together as a country. And they're a great ally in Asia for our country. They have a lot of great access for all of their citizens. They're global leaders in a lot of areas. So that would be an excellent example of how things can change for the positive. All right, if you guys have any questions, let me know.